Hi, and welcome back to True Crime Echoes. This is the place where we slow down, look closer, and revisit the stories history tried to forget. Not the ones that scream for attention, but the ones that whisper. The ones hidden in the margins. The ones that still haunt us long after the facts fade. Today's story is unlike anything I've ever told before. It's about a woman whose name almost disappeared, a poison that looked like perfume, and a quiet rebellion that lasted for decades in a world that never gave women a way out. Her name was Giulia Tofana, and depending on who you ask, she was either one of history's most prolific serial killers or one of the first women to fight back. Let's go back not just to the facts, but to the fear, the desperation, and the silence that made her story possible. This is True Crime Echoes, and today we're listening closely to the life, death, and legend of Giulia Tofana. Chapter 1. A Name History. Forgot you ever come across one of these stories that just grabs you and doesn't let go? Not because it's the most shocking or the bloodiest, but because it's eerie, quiet, hidden in the folds of history, like a whisper no one wanted to hear. That's exactly what happened when I stumbled upon the name Giulia Tofana. I'll be honest, at first it didn't even sound real. A woman from the 1600s who supposedly helped other women poison their husbands with a concoction disguised as makeup. It felt like folklore, something you'd find in a dusty book at the back of a library. But the more I looked into it, the more obsessed I became. Because what if it was real? What if one of history's most prolific and successful serial killers was a woman no one ever talks about? And what if her motive wasn't power or money or revenge, but mercy? See, Giulia's story isn't just about death. It's about survival. About women who were trapped in violent marriages with no legal way out. About a time when being born female often meant being sentenced to silent suffering and sometimes to die giving birth to a child you were forced to conceive. And then in the middle of that darkness, there's Giulia. Not a saint, not exactly a villain either. Just a woman, a chemist, a mother, and maybe to some a savior. That's what we're digging into today. The shadowy life of Giulia Tofana, the poison she crafted, the hundreds of men who allegedly died because of it, and the haunting legacy that might have survived longer than we think. It's a story full of questions, and today we're going to try to find a few answers. Ready? Let's begin. Chapter 2. A woman's world wasn't hers. Before we talk about Giulia, the so-called poisoner, the rule breaker, the one who left her mark on history without ever leaving a portrait behind, we need to understand the world she was born into. Because you can't really grasp what she did until you see what she was up against. Giulia lived during the 1600s in Renaissance Italy. Now, when we think of the Renaissance, we picture art, beauty, invention, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Galileo. But that's only one version of the story. The truth for women, the Renaissance was not a time of light and discovery. It was a time of survival. Girls were married off often in their early teens to men they didn't choose in arrangements made by families who saw them as bargaining chips. Your last name, your dowry, and your virginity, that was your value. And once you were married, that was it. Your husband owned you. Legally, socially, physically, and abuse. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even shocking. Husbands could beat their wives, starve them, lock them in rooms, and the world just looked the other way. Divorce didn't exist, not for women. You couldn't run, you couldn't hide, and if you tried to speak out, no one listened. There was no hotline, no shelter, no law on your side, and childbirth, that was another cruel fate. Women had child after child, often a dozen or more, because contraception was not an option. Each pregnancy carried real risk, and many women died in labor. Even the wealthy weren't safe. No amount of money could stop infection, hemorrhage, or a midwife's mistake. So imagine being a woman living every day in a home you didn't choose with a man who might hurt you, where you might die bearing his child, and no one, not your family, not the church, not the state would save you. You either endured or you escaped. And in a world where escape was impossible, well, that's where Giulia Tofana comes in, because what she offered wasn't freedom, it wasn't justice, but for some women it was the only option they had left. And that changes how you see her, doesn't it? We're not talking about a random killer here. We're talking about someone who existed in the cracks of a system built to silence women and found a way, however dark, to give them a voice. It wasn't clean, it wasn't right, but it was real. And now that you know the world Giulia lived in, maybe you'll understand why so many women came to her. Let's talk about who she really was. Chapter 3: The Woman Behind the Poison. You know what's strange? For someone who allegedly helped hundreds of women escape their marriages, and maybe even life itself, we know almost nothing about Giulia Tofana. No portrait, no letters, no first-hand account, just fragments, whispers. But even in those fragments, you can piece together something remarkable. Some historians believe she was the daughter of another woman accused of poisoning Tofania d'Adamo. That name, it sounds like a ghost. Tofania was executed in 1633 for allegedly killing her husband, and some say she passed her knowledge and maybe even the formula down to Giulia. Others think Giulia taught herself, that she spent time around apothecaries, watching, asking questions, learning how herbs and powders could be mixed to create remedies. Or something much more deadly. Either way, one thing is clear: she knew exactly what she was doing. And she was good at it. Giulia wasn't a monster in the shadows. By all accounts, she was elegant, beautiful, smart. She blended in. She played her role in society: a cosmetics seller, a healer, a woman who helped other women look and feel better. And no one suspected a thing, because what she sold looked harmless. Just tiny bottles, vials with names like Manna of St. Nicholas, disguised as holy oil or face powder, something you'd place on a vanity or carry in a pocket, something that would never be questioned by a suspicious husband. But inside, that's where the story turns, because those bottles didn't hold perfume or miracle cures. They held Aqua Tofana, a poison so precise, so undetectable, that just a few drops could kill a man over several days. Slow, clean, invisible. And Giulia wasn't just making the poison, she was teaching women how to use it, how to dose it, how to act like the grieving wife, how to request a post-mortem to throw off suspicion. She thought of everything. You have to ask yourself, how does someone get there? How does a woman like Giulia become a silent weapon in a world that refused to hear women scream? I don't think it happened overnight. I think it started small, maybe helping one woman who was desperate. And then another. And then another. Until it became something else entirely. A network. A movement. A system of survival built in the shadows. And the most haunting part? No one knows how many died. Some say 100, some say 600. But the truth is, only Giulia knew for sure. And even if she was a killer, she wasn't killing for thrill or wealth or cruelty. She was killing for them, for the ones who had no other way out. That doesn't make it right. But it does make it human. Chapter 4: Aqua Tofana, Death in Disguise. Let me ask you something. If you wanted to hide a murder weapon in plain sight, where would you put it? In Giulia's world, the answer was on a woman's vanity table. That's what made Aqua Tofana so genius and so terrifying. It wasn't just a poison, it was a disguise, a solution wrapped in secrecy, subtlety, and survival. From the outside, it looked like any other beauty product. A tiny bottle labeled as a holy oil or a cosmetic lotion. Something ordinary, something harmless. Sometimes it even came with instructions: apply 2 drops to the cheeks at night, just like real makeup. But inside that bottle was something deadly. A mixture believed to contain arsenic, lead, and belladonna, a cocktail of toxins that had been used throughout history, both in medicine and in murder. The brilliance, if we can call it that, wasn't just in the ingredients. It was in the way it worked. Aqua Tofana didn't kill right away. It wasn't flashy or violent. It crept in, quietly mimicking illness. The first dose, maybe some fatigue, a headache. The second, nausea, stomach cramps. By the third or fourth, vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, and eventually, death. Doctors at the time couldn't detect it. They'd look at the symptoms and chalk it up to a fever or food poisoning or a stomach infection. Nothing suspicious, nothing worth investigating. And that was exactly the point. The victim would never know. the neighbors wouldn't suspect, and the grieving wife. She'd look like a woman who did everything she could, who called the doctor, who prayed by the bedside, who mourned with tears in her eyes. It was the perfect murder. And it was happening again and again and again. But here's the part that sticks with me the most. Giulia didn't sell to just anyone. She wasn't advertising this on the streets. Her clients were women, desperate women, women who were trapped and terrified and saw no way out. And Giulia didn't just hand over the bottle and wish them luck. She walked them through it. She told them how to dose it, how to act, what to say, when to ask for a priest, how to request a post-mortem examination that would come back clean. She coached them not just in killing, but in getting away with it. It wasn't just chemistry. It was choreography. And that's what makes this story so hard to digest. Because the more you learn, the harder it is to see Giulia as just one thing. Was she a murderer? Absolutely. But was she also a lifeline? Maybe. Aqua Tofana wasn't just poison. It was a response to a society that refused to listen to women until they made themselves impossible to ignore. And even then, they had to whisper through the silence. Chapter 5. Whispers, Loyalty, and the Secret Sisterhood. What fascinates me most about Giulia Tofana isn't just the poison, it's the silence, the loyalty. The fact that for nearly 50 years this woman operated in the shadows selling death in tiny bottles, and not a single soul gave her up. Think about that. This wasn't one or two desperate women sneaking around. This was an entire network built entirely on trust. Word of mouth only. No written records, no public trace. Just quiet whispers passed from one woman to another, like a secret recipe no one dared say aloud. Giulia didn't advertise. She didn't sell to just anyone. If you wanted Aqua Tofana, someone had to vouch for you. And that person had to be sure not just that you were desperate, but that you could be trusted, that you wouldn't talk, that you wouldn't break. Because if you did, it wouldn't just cost Giulia her life. It would destroy everyone tied to her, the women she helped, the ones still holding bottles hidden in drawers, the ones who were already widows and living with that secret carved deep into their bones. It was high stakes, and everyone knew it, and knew. So how did Giulia manage to run this underground empire for so long? She was smart. She built a front, a cosmetics counter. On the surface, she was just a woman selling powders and oils to other women in southern Italy. If anyone asked, it was makeup. That was her story, and she stuck to it. But beneath the surface, she was providing something far more dangerous and, in a twisted way, far more empowering. And what's even more astonishing, it worked. For decades it worked. Not because she had power, not in the way men did. Not because she had protection or political connections, but because women protected her. They protected each other. In a world where no one else was looking out for them, they built something of their own. Was it wrong morally, legally? Of course it was. But when you hear about this quiet network of women broken, beaten, forgotten, risking everything to protect the one person who gave them a way out, it's hard not to feel something. Respect. Sadness. Maybe both. It makes me wonder how many lives were quietly rewritten in those years. How many women suddenly became widows, mysterious illnesses, weak hearts, long prayers by the bedside. How many smiled through funerals. How many wept in secret, not from grief, but from relief. We'll never know, because no one talked. They took those secrets to their graves. And Giulia, she became more than a poisoner. She became a symbol, a quiet rebellion dressed in powder and perfume. Not everyone would call her a hero. Some wouldn't even call her human. But to those women, she was hope. Chapter 6. The Soup That Spilled the Secret. Every empire has its breaking point. And for Giulia Tofana, it came in the most ordinary way imaginable over a bowl of soup. That's the part that gets me. It wasn't some grand betrayal or a high-level sting operation. No royal decree, no sudden arrest. Just one woman, one meal, and one moment of hesitation that unraveled years of careful secrecy. The story goes like this. A woman new to Giulia's circle managed to get her hands on Aqua Tofana. Someone must have trusted her enough to make the introduction. Giulia did her usual checks. She asked the questions, made sure this woman wasn't a threat. It all seemed safe, so she gave her the vial. The woman went home ready. She prepared dinner for her husband like she always did. Maybe she'd done it 100 times before, but this time there were 2 drops of poison swirling quietly in his soup. He sat down to eat, and in that moment, just as he lifted the spoon, something shifted. Guilt. It hit her like a wave. Maybe she saw him differently in that second. Maybe she remembered the day they met, or something he said, or maybe she just wasn't ready to carry a secret that heavy. Whatever it was, she panicked. She begged him to stop eating, didn't explain why, just told him to stop. And of course he knew something was wrong. I mean, how could he not? Her panic was too real. Her fear too sudden. He forced her to talk. And when she confessed, it was over. He dragged her to the authorities in Rome, and from there, everything Giulia had built began to crumble. Because the authorities didn't waste time. They tortured that woman until she gave them everything. Names, places, the vial, and most importantly, the name Giulia Tofana. When word reached Giulia, she didn't hesitate. She ran. She knew what happened to women accused of things like this. There would be no fair trial. No one to speak on her behalf. No one to protect her the way she had protected others. She fled to a church, one of the few places left where she could claim sanctuary. She begged for protection, and for a moment she got it. The doors closed behind her. She was safe, temporarily, but the rumors were already spreading like wildfire. People in the city began to panic, and soon the story warped like rumors always do. Someone whispered that Giulia had poisoned the entire water supply of Rome, that her reach went beyond abusive marriages, that she was a threat to everyone. And that was all it took. Fear turned into fury. A mob gathered. Crowds of angry people convinced that Giulia had tried to murder the whole city marched to the church where she was hiding, and they demanded blood. The church, under pressure and fear of violence, gave her up. After years of secrecy, strategy, and survival, Giulia Tofana was in chains, and the silence that had protected her for so long, it finally broke. Chapter 7. Confessions. Punishment and the final silence. They say the truth comes out under pressure, but when the pressure is torture, what kind of truth is that, really? When Giulia Tofana was finally captured, she was no longer the quiet chemist working behind the veil of powders and oils. She was now a symbol, a target, and the authorities were determined to make an example of her. She was interrogated, questioned, broken down, and tortured. Because that's how justice worked back then. It wasn't about proof, it was about confessions. And if you didn't give one, they'd make you wish you had. Eventually, Giulia gave in. She admitted to poisoning men, not a few, but hundreds. Some reports say she claimed responsibility for over 600 deaths between 1633 and 1651. But here's the thing. She was under extreme duress. She was in agony. And people will say anything to make the pain stop. So was it 600? Was it less? Was it more? We'll never really know. What we do know is that her confession set off a chain reaction. The authorities wanted more than just Giulia. They wanted names her clients, her helpers, the web of women who had stayed silent for so long. And Giulia gave them some. Not all. She said she couldn't remember everyone, which may have been true, or maybe it was her final act of protection. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. In July of 1659, Giulia Tofana was executed in Rome's Campo dei Fiori. Alongside her were her daughter, who had helped her prepare and distribute the poison, and 3 of her close associates. Women, all of them. Giulia's body was thrown over the wall of the very church that had once given her sanctuary. A final insult. A warning to anyone who dared defy the order of things. Some of her clients were punished too, the ones who couldn't convincingly play dumb. A few insisted they thought Aqua Tofana was just a beauty product, that they had no idea it was lethal. And maybe some of them really didn't. But the courts didn't care. Some were executed, others were sealed, literally bricked into the dungeons of the Palace of the Holy Office, buried alive beneath the weight of their secrets. And then, just like that, it was over. Giulia was dead, her empire collapsed, the silence shattered. But something about this story lingers. Because even as she was dying, even as her name was dragged through the dirt, Giulia had already become something bigger than herself. A ghost, a warning, a legend passed through time. Some saw her as a villain, others as a quiet revolutionary. And even now, centuries later, we're still talking about her. We still can't quite decide what she was. Was she a monster, or was she a mirror? Chapter 8: Echoes That Never Faded. Long after Giulia Tofana was gone, her name continued to echo, not in textbooks, not in history classes, but in whispers, in rumors, in the fear that something or someone like her might still be out there. In 1791, more than a century after Giulia's death, the composer Mozart fell suddenly ill, and as his body weakened as fever took over and death crept closer, he made a chilling claim. "I am sure I have been poisoned," he said. "Someone has given me Aqua Tofana." Now, was he really poisoned? Historians say probably not. Maybe it was a fever, maybe undercooked pork, maybe syphilis. But it didn't matter, because what does it say? That even Mozart believed in her, that a woman long dead still haunted the minds of the living. That's what gets me. Giulia Tofana wasn't just a person. She became an idea, a symbol of something darker, something powerful, the kind of fear that only grows in silence. And even now, we're still not sure who she really was. Was she a serial killer hiding behind a veil of powder and perfume? Or was she something else, a woman who dared to give other women control in a world that gave them none? The truth probably lives somewhere in between. Because yes, murder is murder. We don't celebrate it. We don't excuse it. But we also can't ignore the world that made Giulia possible. A world where women had no legal escape, no rights, no safety, no voice. And when you back someone into a corner long enough sometimes, they find a way out. Giulia's story isn't clean. It's not easy to process. And maybe that's exactly why we need to talk about it. Because it asks hard questions about power, about morality, about what justice really looks like when none is offered to you. And maybe that's the true legacy of Aqua Tofana. Not just a poison, but a mirror held up to a society that refused to see the damage it caused, until the damage started to bite back. Thanks for staying with me through this one. Giulia Tofana's story isn't easy. It doesn't offer clean answers or a clear line between right and wrong. But maybe that's what makes it so powerful, because the truth, especially in history, is rarely simple. Was she a villain, a savior? A little of both. I'd love to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments, especially if this story challenged you, surprised you, or left you wondering. And if you're into stories like this, the ones buried under dust, wrapped in mystery, and filled with difficult truths, don't forget to subscribe. I release new deep dive episodes every week, and I'd love to have you here for the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, be kind to others, and remember, sometimes the quietest names in history echo the loudest. This is True Crime Echoes. I'll see you soon.